Hi, I'm James Kahn, and these are my stories. This story is called Rex and the Things That I've Seen. It starts out in the autumn of 2017, and I was trying to raise money for a little independent movie I was trying to put together called Wrong Side Bob. So I was having a fundraiser up at a winery in Santa Ynez, and this guy walks up to me, and he points at the poster and says, "You know, I know James Kahn." And so I said, "Well, that's funny, I am James Kahn." He said, "Well, that's interesting. I obviously don't recognize each other's faces, but I always remember 30 or 40 years ago, you and I were on an airplane together from New York to LA. We sat next to each other, and we talked about our movie lives. I was at Warner Brothers doing graphics, and you were at Universal, and we spent the whole time talking about that, and it was really a memorable trip. The fact that we met back then and we're meeting again now is destiny, it's fate." So I said, okay. He said, "In fact, I think I'd like you to come see me at my house on the reservation." I don't know why exactly, but I just think it's meant to be. So I said, "You still working at Warner Brothers?" He said, "No, I'm an archaeologist for a long time. I do work for people who are developing land around the state. And I've even written in peer-reviewed archaeological journals." I thought, "Really? You don't look like that guy, but okay." And I came to realize that was the beginning of things that Rex often said that you think initially, wait, what? And then later you realize it's true. So I went to visit him on the reservation, and he lived in a little kind of house, but it was just filled with fossils of all kinds. So that was the first corroboration of his story. Fossils and Indian artifacts found in this area. And he said, "Yeah, these are things that I've found over the years." And he showed me the archaeological journal that he'd published in. It's this one. He brought me here because he wanted to tell me his story about what he had written about in this archaeological journal, and why he thought that somehow we were connected and I was meant to hear this story. The story is he was working on a 30,000-acre ranch near San Luis Obispo, looking for fossil beds and artifacts to identify before the rancher, the man who owned the ranch, developed the land. He was doing that, and he came upon an old oak tree. And on the north side of the oak tree was an old carving, like an 8-foot tall carving. And here's a picture of the carving that he found. He's sitting next to it here. And here's a little more close-up of it. Looks kind of like a man, like an extraterrestrial maybe, or some kind of humanoid guy. He found that carving and took a picture of it and brought it back to the man who owned the ranch. Said, "Do you know what this is all about?" And the rancher said, "Oh, my grandpa brought me to show me that when I was 5, and his grandpa showed him when he was 5. It's an old cowboy carving." And Rex thought to himself, "That's no cowboy carving, that's an Indian carving." So he took the picture he had taken and brought it back to the elders of the tribe. And the elders of the tribe said to him, "Oh, I'm really glad you found that. Now I want you to go back there on the night of the winter solstice and tell us what you see." So Rex thought, okay. So he went there on the winter solstice, and he just sat around, and the sun went down and the stars came out, and he was looking at it. And as the stars rose, he had an epiphany. And that was that as the constellations rose up above this tree, he saw the North Star rising where this hole had been carved in the tree. And the Big Dipper rose right above what was the head of this figure. And the square of the Big Dipper was the head of this figure. The figure had 2 antennae. One was the hands of the Big Dipper, one was part of Ursa Major, and there was a collar carved under the figure, a W. That was Cassiopeia, which was also rising at that time. He went back with his conclusions to the elders, and they said, "Well, that's a good start, but study it for a few more years and then tell us what you find out." So he decided to devote his life to this study. And he went back to original sources and found journals of Harrington, a famous old archaeologist an anthropologist from the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, and interviews with old elders from around that time as well, and maps to old caves. And what he discovered was the head and collar of this figure was the stars surrounding the North Star. But there was also a tail to this figure that previous anthropologists had always attributed to being a tail or a phallus on this humanoid figure that they thought was like a psilocybin dream of brujos from the tribe. But what he learned was this was actually a stake. And if you carved this figure as a petroglyph into a flat rock and put this stake in the ground facing due north, that the head of the figure was the constellations I described, but the arms of the figure were the shadow that the stake cast over the course of the day on the winter solstice. He went back there and made one of these himself, and sure enough, at 9 o'clock, the shadow point of this stake was at this tip of the arm, and slowly over the course of the day, it was right here in the middle of the arms at noon where it crossed the body, and then the arms were finished at the end of the day. The legs, which were facing down, turned out with the shadow of this stake over the course of the winter solstice. And there was a line through the belly button, which is the shadow that was made over the equinoxes. And he decided to build a stone like this, a flat stone, in my yard. So he did, and he came and he visited it on the winter solstice, where he stayed there all day and marked out the shadow points that made the creature's arms. And he came on the summer solstice and made the creature's legs. And as he was drawing it, he always insisted that he wasn't drawing this creature. He was just channeling it from Creator, from the sun and stars who were actually making this creature. In the Chumash language, it was called Siwat, which is, this is my body. And this is the Creator telling us this is the body that he's made, our body, and he's making this body to tell us about it. Meanwhile, I've been going back into the music studio, and the guy who produces my music, David West, he said, you ought to do another Irish kind of song. You've done a couple of those that have a nice Irish tone. So I said, okay, Irish song. So I started thinking about doing an Irish song. And then I finally came up with this musical phrase, this chord phrase that I liked, that was this. So I noodled around with that, and then I realized at one point that it reminded me kind of chordally of an old Irish song that I used to sing my kids when they were small, called Terry O'Day, that I'd heard from either Peter, Paul and Mary or the Chad Mitchell Trio. I can't remember which. But it was about this little frog who dressed in a red vest and sailed around in a shoe, and a dog with 14-yard legs. And the stories got more and more elaborate, and it ended with, and if anyone tells better stories than that, they must be lying. So it's a very Irish song. So I started trying to think of things like that. And the phrase, the textual phrase that came to me with the melody that I had gotten was, oh, the things that I've seen. Oh, the things that I've seen. And I thought that fit in with that kind of idea. I'd be talking about, oh, I've seen this, and oh, I've seen that. So I wrote that for things like that for a little while, but it wasn't working, and I didn't want to write the same song that had already been written by a real Irishman. So I just left it and didn't do anything with it for days or a week. While that was going on, Jill, my wife, came to me one day and said, you seem kind of depressed lately. I was kind of annoyed at her saying that. I said, I'm not depressed. I'm playing music, I'm writing my novel, I'm working in the garden, I'm going to the gym, I'm doing all these things that I really love to do, and it's making me happy, and I'm not depressed. I kind of annoyed with her. So she said, okay, I'm just saying. So that went on, and then one day I woke up in the morning out of a dream, and I couldn't remember what the dream was, but I knew now suddenly that the song was about a man lying on his deathbed saying goodbye to his friends and saying, oh, the things that I've seen, as he dies. So my first thought was, maybe Jill was right, I am depressed. Then I remembered, I was about to turn 70. So I was that guy in the song, facing my last act. Nonetheless, I went on and I wrote the song, or the whole song just came to me over a course of a day. And I wrote it, and I recorded it, and it was great. It was beautiful, and I felt like moved by it, and it talked about things in my life that were sad or beautiful or moving or regretful or whatever. And then in the midst of all that, just as I'd finished the song, Oh, the Things That I've Seen, Rex showed up one day with some friends, said, do you mind if we do a ceremony in your yard? So I said, okay, sure. So he burned sage and did clouding with it, and they chanted the old songs, and he asked me if I'd be part of it, and I said, sure. And at the end of the ceremony, he took out 2 eagle feathers, which Native Americans are allowed to have, because it's part of their religion, and he stood behind me, and he put the feathers in front of my eyes, and he said, this is for the things that you've seen. I was like stunned. I said, where did you hear that? And he said, it just came to me. I didn't know what to make of it. It kind of startled me. But it's, it was part of his sense of intuition that the people in the tribe talk about, or if Jung were talking about it, he'd call it synchronicity, or if J.B. Ryan were talking about it, he'd call it ESP. I don't know what to call it, but at this point, maybe you'd be interested in hearing the song.